My name is Dr. Frederick Trifts. I'm a doctor at the London hospital. It was the year 1984. I was taking a walk. I saw a curious picture on the window of a shop. Something made me take a second look. The picture shows a man, a creature, ugly and horrible. He looked like an elephant. The writing on the picture says, "Come see the elephant man, 2 pence." A filthy-looking man walked out of the shop. He had on an old coat and a cigarette in his mouth. The man told me rudely to come back later as they were closed now. I said I would give him more than 2 pence to see the elephant man. The man smiled with his yellow teeth and obliged. He took me to a dark room. It was dirty and cold. The man sat on a chair. His head was covered. In front of him was a table and a dead flower on the table. The creature stood up slowly to take the cloth off his head. Being a doctor, I see cases like this in patients every day, but this man seems to suffer the worst possible deformation. His head was very big. It did not have much hair. His eyes were almost covered by the thick skin. He could not smile or laugh. He had no expressions, like an elephant. Although his right arm and hand was enormous with thick skin, his left hand, however, was soft and delicate, almost like a woman's hand. Simon hit him with a stick to make him walk. The creature could not walk very well. He needed a stick to help him. The man with the yellow teeth, his name was Simon Silcock. He said the creature's name was Joseph Myteach. I appealed to Mr. Silcock when we were outside the shop that I would like to take Myteach to the hospital. But it was going to be difficult because Myteach can't walk very well. We would need a cab. The next day, we arrived at the shop. Joseph wore a long black coat and the same cloth covering his ugly face. He was walking with a stick. He asked for help up the steps of the cab. Children were coming by to see this strange person. Some made naughty remarks. Inside the cab, Joseph and I struck up a conversation. He asked me who I was. I told him I was a doctor and gave him my card. We did not say much after that. When we arrived at the hospital, a nurse and I helped him inside. Myteach did not smile or say anything. I think he was afraid. I did not see Myteach again for 2 years, but one day some policemen found him and he had my card. So they brought him to the London hospital, but the problem was Myteach was not ill. The hospital does not give beds to ugly or hungry people, only the sick. Mr. Cargom, chairman of the hospital, decided to write a letter to the editor of the Times newspaper. In the letter, he highlighted Myteach's troubles and hardships. He asked if the readers of the Times can do anything to help Myteach stay at the hospital. Myteach was very clever with his hands. He would make things and give them to the nurses. After about a week, the kind readers of the Times had donated £50,000. Myteach could live in the hospital all his life. Life at the hospital was a happy one for Myteach. He no longer smelled and his skin was improving. But sometimes people still react unkindly around him. Nurses would scream in fright at his appearance and some would laugh at him. This would make Myteach sad. He would look at the picture of his mother and he would ask me to put him somewhere far away when he can no longer remain at the hospital. I smiled and told him about the letter to the Times and how he would never have to leave the hospital. Myteach was quiet. Later I could hear a strange sound coming from him. It sounded like laughter. I felt it was not right for Myteach to be alone. I told one of my friends about him. One day she came to visit him. Myteach was very happy. He had never spoken to another woman. Later, he told me how wonderful it was to have another person smile at him. Myteach was no longer alone. People came to visit him often. Newspapers wrote about him and he had more visitors. They no longer laughed at him. One day, Myteach had a very important visitor. It was the Queen of England herself, Queen Alexandra. Myteach felt so honored and happy. The Queen sent Myteach a card over the Christmas period with a short, kind note. Myteach had never received any cards before. He cried tears of joy. He sat down and wrote a letter to the Queen, thanking her for the card. Myteach had many friends now, but he was still like a child. He did not understand a lot of things, and he played like a child. Myteach went to a play once, and he had many questions. After a while, Myteach asked if he could go visit the countryside. We took a train at night so no one would see Myteach. I took him to a country house on a cab. I stayed with Myteach for the night. When we woke the next day, the birds were singing and the trees were a beautiful green. Myteach hopped around merrily, singing a strange tune. Myteach stayed on when I returned to London. He wrote to me every week. He wrote about the trees and the streams. He wrote about the birds and the fishes. Myteach sounded very happy, but he also wrote that he hoped we could meet again. Unfortunately, 6 months later, Myteach died in his sleep. Normally he would sit upright and rest his head on his knees to sleep. Because of his big head, it was impossible for him to sleep lying down like a normal person. But on that fateful day, Myteach wanted to sleep like a normal person. He laid on his back, but his heavy head went off the edge of the bed and broke his neck. He died instantly. Mr. Carr Gomm wrote one last letter to the editor of the Times. In the letter, Mr. Carr informed the editor the passing of Myteach and how his life had changed because of the kind readers of the Times. Whatever money that was left from the donation will be given to the hospital and put to good use. Joseph Myteach may have gone, but his memory will forever be in my heart.